who are you? I mean, really, who are you? It's probably the biggest question we ever ask ourselves. We spend so much time trying to figure out what makes us tick, and what makes the people around us tick. Well, today, we are going to explore the most solid, scientifically backed map of human personality that exists. I bet you've been asked this before, right? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? We just love putting people and ourselves into these neat little boxes. It makes things feel simple, manageable. But what if personality is way more complicated than that? What if it's less about which box you fit in and more about where you land on a bunch of rich, colorful spectrums? Okay, so let's get into the real difference here. Think about personality types like they're totally separate buckets of paint. You're either in the red bucket or the blue bucket. That's it. But traits? Traits are way more like a continuous color spectrum. You could be anywhere between red and blue, with all these infinite beautiful shades of purple in between. And while those type theories are super popular, pretty much all modern psychology research leans into the trait model. Why? Because it actually captures how diverse we really are. We're not just one thing or another. We're a totally unique blend. So if we're not just a bunch of types, then what are we? Well, the scientific world has pretty much agreed on a framework called the Big Five. You might also hear it called the five-factor model. This is the gold standard, seriously. It's backed by decades and decades of research across all sorts of different cultures and languages. And you know what the best part is? There's a super simple way to remember these 5 core dimensions. Just think of the word ocean. That stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These 5 spectrums, together, are believed to form the basic structure of all our personalities. All right, so what do these 5 traits actually look like in the real world? Let's do a deep dive and break down each letter of ocean one by one. First up is O for openness to experience. This trait is all about how open you are to, well, new experiences. It's about curiosity, creativity, and a willingness to try new things. People who are high in openness, they're often super imaginative, they love art, and they're really in tune with their feelings. On the other hand, people who are lower in openness tend to be more practical, they like their routines, and they prefer the familiar. And you can kind of hear how this plays out in how people talk about themselves. Someone high in openness might say, yeah, I have a rich vocabulary, or I spend a lot of time just thinking about things. But if you find yourself nodding along to, I'm not really interested in abstract ideas, that probably means you fall on the lower end of that particular spectrum. Next up, we've got C for conscientiousness. This one is all about self-discipline and reliability. It describes how we control and direct our impulses. Think about that friend who is always on time, whose home is perfectly organized, and who always follows through. They are likely high in conscientiousness. They prefer a plan over just winging it. So, what does this sound like? Well, a highly conscientious person would probably agree with a statement like, I am always prepared. But on the flip side, someone who admits, yeah, I tend to make a mess of things, would score lower. This just means they're probably a bit more spontaneous and maybe less organized.
Let's move on to E for extraversion. This is the one most of us have heard of. It's all about how you engage with the world outside yourself. Extroverts literally get their energy from being around other people and doing things. They're often chatty, enthusiastic, and assertive. Now, introverts, on the other end, aren't necessarily shy. That's a big misconception. They just have a smaller social battery, and they need to recharge with some alone time.
And you can really see the contrast here, can't you? The classic extrovert loves being the life of the party and has no problem starting conversations. An introvert, though, might feel more kinship with, I don't really like to draw attention to myself. And again, neither one is better than the other. They're just different ways of managing your energy. Now for A, which stands for agreeableness. This trait is all about how much you value social harmony. Do you prioritize getting along with others? Agreeable people are often seen as kind, trusting, and helpful. They're the compromisers, the ones who tend to have a pretty optimistic view of other people. So, what does agreeableness sound like? It's the person who naturally says, I really sympathize with how others are feeling. The other end of the spectrum is marked by more skepticism, maybe a more competitive edge. So someone who admits, yeah, I insult people sometimes, would score very low here. And finally, we have N for neuroticism. Now, this one sounds a little clinical, but it's really about emotional stability. People who score high in neuroticism tend to experience negative emotions like anxiety, anger, or sadness more frequently and more intensely. They're more emotionally reactive. The opposite end of the spectrum, the low-scoring end, is often just called emotional stability.
This trait often shows up as a tendency to worry. If you find yourself thinking, man, I get stressed out so easily, that's a classic sign of high neuroticism. In contrast, someone who agrees with, I'm relaxed most of the time, scores lower, which means they're generally more calm and emotionally resilient.
Okay, so that's our ocean framework. But where did this whole thing even come from? And more importantly, why does it actually matter? Because believe me, this is way more than just some abstract psychological theory. It's a seriously powerful tool for understanding real life.
Right, so this model didn't just pop up overnight. It started way back in the 1880s with a really cool idea. If a trait is important to us as humans, we'll probably have a word for it in our language. So psychologists started gathering thousands of these trait words and used some fancy statistics to see which words tended to clump together. And over decades, researchers kept finding, again and again, that personality seemed to boil down to these same 5 super stable factors.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. These traits aren't just for fun, they actually have predictive power. Seriously. Research consistently shows that being high in conscientiousness is linked to doing better at work, getting better grades, and even living longer. High agreeableness, better relationships. Extroversion often predicts who will become a leader. And high neuroticism is a major risk factor for things like anxiety and depression. See? This stuff matters. Our personality profile can give us real clues about our life's journey. So at the end of the day, the Big 5 model helps us move away from those simple, restrictive labels. It's a reminder that personality isn't a fixed box you're stuck in. Instead, we're all a unique, complex recipe, a distinct combination of where we happen to fall on each of these 5 huge dimensions. And that's what makes every single one of us who we are. And that really brings us to the final question, the one for you. This whole framework isn't about judging people, it's about understanding them and yourself. So just take a second to think about it. Where do you think you fall? Are you more open to new things, or do you prefer what's familiar? Are you the life of the party, or do you recharge your batteries alone? Just thinking about where you might land on these 5 spectrums is a huge first step toward knowing yourself a little bit better.